We'll be starting in Genesis chapter 37, which is a very well-known story, a very popular story. It's a very popular story to talk about. Many lessons has been brought out of Genesis chapter 37. And it's dealing with Joseph. And I'm going to just read the first two verses, and I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to talk about types and shadows. So as this unfolds, maybe we get a better picture at why we have this story in the Bible and what it points to. And so we find in Genesis chapter 37 that Jacob dwelt in the land wherein his father was a stranger in the land of Canaan. And these are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren, and the lad was with his sons of Bilhah and with his sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought unto his father their evil report. And I'm going to kind of stop right there and using that for kind of an introduction that this is a story that we're going to be studying over the course of the next couple of weeks. And what a powerful story it is. There's a lot that can be gleaned out of it. Here again, this is one of those stories that is tragic in nature, but out of tragedy was born triumph. So it is a very encouraging story to read about Joseph and the will that God had for Joseph in his life. You know, we find that Joseph was the son of Rachel and Jacob's old age. And so he loved Joseph very much. And this is going to see as we talk about the partiality that he had and how this played into the hatred that his brothers had for him. But also I want to take time for just a minute, and I want to let you know that I was trying to prepare a handout for this and was running it out this morning on my printer. And just to let you know, this is what it looks like. Unfortunately, I got to the 5th copy, and guess what happened, Jeremy? Run out of ink, may as well quit. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to still go over it, and then next week you will have a handout of what we're going to cover, then we might go over it in a little more detail next week, okay? And so we find that Brother Geddes Roy, and he does a real good job on types and shadows in his book, Types and Shadows, okay? And it's all types and shadows. And a lot of times when we talk about the types and shadows in here, some of the information I do pull out of his book, okay? And then some of it, as you read it, there's more than what maybe he has listed and others has listed. So it's a powerful lot of types and shadows when you go to studying these Old Testament chapters, okay? One of the things, though, that you do begin to get a picture of in Genesis chapter 37 about Joseph is him being a type of Christ, a shadow of him being a type of Christ. And as you look at it, it becomes more and more evident. And Brother Roy had picked out about 14 points that he had noticed in this chapter that shows that parallel. Now I can tell you as we go through it, we're probably going to see others, okay? It's like anything else, okay? But these are 14 that are readily seen in the story of Joseph and what happened to Joseph. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to kind of go through it briefly verbally, then next week we'll have the handout for you to look at, and we may go over it in a little more detail, okay? One of the things that he had noticed was that with Joseph, divine providence overruled the envy of his brothers. Divine providence overruled the envy of his brothers. Remember we said what seems like a tragic story, and it is the way it was played out by man, but it became a triumphant story for the glory of God. And we've seen that over and over again, haven't we? God has a purpose and plan, and he's going to carry out that purpose and plan. And some of the references is, as you get into the story, Genesis chapter 37 is just the beginning of the story, but over in Genesis 45:5, chapter 50, 15 through 21, you find the triumph victory of Joseph becoming prime minister in Egypt over the granary, and the salvation of his brothers from starvation in Canaan, and the attitude that he displayed. And so we find in Christ, divine providence overruled the wickedness of the Jews. God's will overruled their wickedness. There again, there is a tragic story being played out. But in the background, God's plan is being played out. These Jews thought they was triumphant over Jesus Christ. Then we know in Matthew chapter 27, verse 18, why did the Jews deliver Christ? Pilate said it was because of envy. We know if you broaden that spectrum, you can include unbelief. And you can include hatred and malice and all those other things, but it specifically talks about envy there. It's why he's before Pilate. So, and so we find that God's plan overrode man's input. We can find that in Genesis chapter 3:15, John 10:17 through 18, Romans 6:23. The second notice is that Joseph was Jacob's beloved son. He was the son of his old age. Genesis 33:2, 37:3. We find in comparison that Jesus was God's only begotten son. In John chapter 3 and verse 16, for an example. Joseph was sent on a mission by his father. Jesus, too, was sent on a mission by his father. Of course, Jesus' mission had to do with salvation, a spiritual value, and Joseph's mission had to do with a direction by his father to go to his brothers that was supposed to be his Shechem, and they wasn't. They were in Dothan, and we'll talk about that when we get into the lesson a little bit. We find that Joseph was rejected by his brethren. Here again, we see it because of envy. Genesis 37:3 and 4. And Jesus was rejected by his own people, as we said, through envy and unbelief. John 1:11 through 12, Zechariah 13:6, and others. Another thing that we notice about Jacob is he is hated because of his dreams of exaltation. He is hated because of his dreams of exaltation. Genesis chapter 37, 3 through 11. Jesus was hated much in the same manner. He claimed to be king. He claimed to be king. And of course, the Jews didn't like that. Joseph's brother didn't like the thought of him being a type of king or ruler over them. Jeremy?
See, sometimes these dreams also is prophetic.
Oh yeah, they are. They were very prophetic.
And even the one with Jesus saying he would raise up in 3 days and establish anew, and they're like, this is blasphemy. It took, decades to build this temple. Yeah, if you're going to build it in 3 days, who are you?
Right, exactly. This is very prophetic, and we're going to talk about that, and I hope already that you can see some of the parallels as what's happened in Joseph's life, the prophecy of the dream, and the things that's going to go on in this. Oh yeah, it's very prophetic. It sure is. It sure is. And it's all going to come true. We also find here that Joseph was stripped of his coat of many colors. He was stripped of his coat of many colors, Genesis chapter 37, verses 18 through 36. We find, too, that Jesus was stripped of his garment, wasn't he? And they cast lots for him. Excuse me. Matthew chapter 27, verse 35, John 19, 23 through 24, etc., etc. Like I said, you'll have this in writing next week. Should have had it today, but, modern technology sometimes and ink and, don't cooperate now. Anyway, we find that Joseph was sold for 20 pieces of silver. Genesis chapter 37, 23 to 28. Jesus was sold for 30 pieces of silver. Matthew 26, 15, 27, 3 through 5. Another point is Joseph's brethren thought they had got rid of him. They thought they had got rid of him by what they had done. Genesis 37, 28. The enemies of Jesus thought they had got rid of him. Mark 15, 13 through 14, Isaiah 53, 10 through 12, and others. But something happened in the life of both Joseph and Jesus. Later, Joseph's brothers had to face him. Kind of a type of judgment, wasn't it? He had the authority of being prime minister there in Egypt. He could have had a bit of heart in him and all like that, but God had tempered him to where he could have had him killed. He sure could. All he had to do was say the word, and it would be the end of the story, wouldn't it? But he did. But they had to face him. Later we find that the enemies of Jesus Christ had to face him after the resurrection. There was no way of getting around it and no denying it. And one day, if you want to look at this from a judgmental standpoint of view, we'll have to face Jesus Christ. Just as Joseph faced the brothers faced Joseph in reality. Joseph's brethren lied about what had became of him. They're going to lie about what became of him. Genesis chapter 37, 31 through 34. Well, the enemies of Jesus had created false statements, lied about him, and paid money for it to be done. Matthew 28, 11 through 15. Joseph was tempted by Potiphar's wife, and we're going to find that in Genesis 39, 7 through 12. Jesus also was tempted by the world, wasn't he? He was tempted by the devil to have possession of the world in Matthew chapter 4, wasn't he? And both refused. Joseph literally ran, one foot in front of the other. And of course, Jesus resisted the temptation of the devil. Joseph became ruler and invited his starving brethren to Egypt. And we'll find that in Genesis chapter 45 and Genesis chapter 50. We find Jesus became ruler and does the same thing. He invites those that are starving for the Word of God and for right and for salvation to come in to his kingdom, doesn't he? We find also that Joseph forgave his brethren. Joseph forgave his brethren. Genesis chapter 45, 1 through 15, 50, 15 through 21. We find that Jesus forgives and pardons sinners, Luke 23, 34, Mark 16, 15 through 16, and Hebrews 5 through 9. I can't help but to think about Jesus on the cross as he looked down there with all the mocking and ridicule and persecution that he was undergoing. He had these words to say. If you stop and think about the setting of it, it'll make cold chills run down your back. It'll make the hair stand up on the back of your neck, Jeff. You know what Jesus said there? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Just as Joseph forgave his brethren for what they did, Jesus forgave those for what they did. And the last one that we're going to talk about, Joseph gave his people Goshen, Genesis 45:10, which was the best of the land. And that's in type to what Jesus has offered to us, the best of the land, spiritually. And that'll be heaven. And we can find that in John 14, 1 through 4, Hebrews 4 through 9, Revelation 21 through 4. So I thought I would run through that because it's really interesting. And as we go through this, it may, like a lot of things, help us to paint a better picture of how important these events are. We know that the old Bible pointed to who? Christ. And so everywhere you turn, what are you running into? The pointing of Christ. Jeremy, looked like you had something you wanted to say.
I was going to say, too, with Joseph, it's like he was dead. Certain brothers knew otherwise, but for the most part, people thought he's dead.
Yeah.
Now
He resurrected, so to speak.
back again.
Yeah.
He's in a position of power, and he ends up saving his brothers as a savior and the family, and ultimately
There you go. That's right.
Jesus' bloodline.
Yeah, right. So, and so we find there's a lot there. See, and I think maybe you added one that he didn't have in there. You may have added two, but we'll talk about that a little bit next week. So see, there's a whole lot in here that we can glean from these. It's kind of like when we go back to these genealogies last week, and a lot of times when we read the Bible and we get over in this, we say, well, what's the point? Well, you can rest assured Moses didn't pencil all of this to take up space, okay? The failure to understand what's going on most of the time is on whose part? Our part, To get a better picture, Moses put that genealogy in there to show, yes, that God's promises came through to Esau. But because Esau was of the world, it paints a picture that the things of the world are going to do what? Fade away. And, maybe this is not a good statement because we know when we say fade away, it's going to pass from view. But in a sense, the world's going to pass from view when everything's destroyed. So as far as God's concerned, that ended it with Esau. He laid out his own course, and God let him take off in it. And so we find that there's a lot to learn here. And so as we begin this study here in Genesis chapter 37, and these events are taking place somewhere around 1729 BC, and I was going to look, but I didn't, but I was going to look, some of you may know, running parallel to these events is the throne of Egypt being set up. This is where Joseph is going to wind up as prime minister in Egypt. So there's a lot of activity with kingdoms and thrones and things of that nature being set up in the entire world that runs parallel to this. Because a lot of these places is where these people go. And yet the Bible doesn't deal in that because they are kingdoms of men. Here again, what the Bible has given us a historical account of is how we got to the kingdom of Christ. And that's what it concerns itself with, because that's where salvation's at. Really, as far as the Bible is concerned, it's kind of irrelevant to what's going on in the rest of the world, because it's the world. But it's still there. Things are still happening in these other kingdoms. Other kingdoms are being set up by God for His purpose and plan. And yet we find the history of what we have here of Joseph. And one of the things that you notice right off the bat about this, that Joseph was a young person, wasn't he? Probably that day and age, he was growing of age and taking on more responsibility, because we know back then people, shall I say, grew up a lot quicker than they do now. But he had some sense of responsibility that we're going to see. But being 17 years old, and so we find that his father thought him old enough to take on a task to go check on his brethren, didn't he? And that says a lot about someone 17 years old. And so we find that Joseph, it says here that was feeding, with his, whatever went on here, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, Joseph, Jacob's father's wife, Joseph brought unto his father an evil report. Now we know these guys that Joseph is dealing with here already have proven to be not very reputable, even in the eyes of their father, because of some prior events that had happened here. And we know we studied about what happened here with Reuben, what happened here with Simeon, what happened here with Levi. They kind of counseled themselves out of the promise or the lineage of Christ, so to speak. And so we find that these people were kind of ruthless and bloodthirsty. And as a matter of fact, Jacob said in Genesis chapter 34 and verse 30, Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have troubled me to make me stink amongst the inhabitants of the land." And what they had done, they had taken revenge on their sister Dinah for what had happened there with the Horites around the area of Shechem there. So we're going to find that the reason that's mentioned there is Joseph was in some very uncomfortable company, let's put it that way. These people could be very treacherous, his brothers, and they've already demonstrated that. And now it says here that Joseph brought unto his father their evil report. So whatever was going on with them, Joseph went and told on his brethren. Now, one of the things that we're going to find is that when you begin down that line, when a lot of times siblings go to telling on each other, what does that become? Well, you're a tattletale, okay? And that probably didn't go over very good either, did it? Along with a couple of other events that's going to transpire. And I don't really know what this evil report was, but whatever it was, they must have been into something that they shouldn't have been. I'll put it that way. Don't really know. There's some speculation out there, and I don't want to get into all that unless some of you want to bring some of it up. But there's speculation out there, but the Bible just says there was an evil report brought against them, okay? So whatever they were doing, Joseph thought it important enough to be brought into their father. Brother Con, you have something you want to bring into that?
No, the only thought I had, not the only one, but that was one of the thoughts I had, the bringing up of Joseph out of the pit. They put him in the pit. Reuben suggested putting him in the pits. Says shed no blood.
Right.
And so, but bringing him out of the pit was a type of a resurrection.
Here we go. See, we had 14, Jeremy had a couple, so we'll say 16, now you got 17.
He was buried in the earth. He
Right.
was buried in the pit, which is
Right.
very much of a semblance to it.
Right, exactly, yeah. Yeah, that's very good. Yeah, that's one that,
Like you said, you just keep on finding stuff.
you just keep on finding stuff once you kind of get to thinking about what's going on here. What picture is this trying to paint in our life, okay? Those things that are written aforetime are written for what?
This is a highly interesting chapter.
It is. It is.
Gives you a lot of food for thought.
Sure. Now, one of the things that we're going to see, and I'll read verses 3 and 4. Now, Jacob or Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was a son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him and could not speak peaceably unto him. So, one of the things that you see happening here is parental partiality beginning to take place. And the Bible tells us the reason that Jacob was partial to Joseph was because he was a son, in his old age. And you can kind of see as a human being how there would be some partiality in that thought and in that idea. I know a lot of times, as you get older, you begin to think about things that, well, maybe this is the last little one I'll see, so you may even have a tendency to take up more time with that one than you did the other ones and things of that nature. So you can kind of see how that could play into being. But when you begin to think about being a parent and you've got children and plurality, partiality is one thing you have to watch out for. Because what will happen is that will breed a lot of internal animosity amongst the children. And we see another reason here why they begin to hate Joseph. His father had showed him partiality, had made him this coat of many colors. So the distinguishing part is it really stood out, didn't it? It really stood out. Brother Kyle, maybe everybody else was having to wear some combination sheep wool and camel hair. And here Joseph was, he had this pretty spectacular leather jacket.
Oh, yeah.
Now, how's that going to play out in the family? Well, he got a leather jacket that's spectacular, and I got to wear this old sheep wool. I mean, so that breeds animosity, doesn't it? Okay? And to keep animosity down, you try to lay it out even across the board. And we see that happening on a small scale, don't we? A lot of times maybe you're somewhere, something happens, or maybe a child runs in the house and you give that child a sucker, and then here in a little bit the other children come in, why'd you give him a sucker? Why'd you give her a sucker? Where's our sucker? So you even see it on a small scale like that a lot of times, don't you? And so it's something to be watchful for on this and about this parental partiality. And there has been some thought about this coat too, separating Joseph from the standpoint of where it was made, that the way the length of it was and all like that, it distinguishes Joseph from being maybe an ordinary sheep herder and maybe had a little bit of status. But now, what we do know is Joseph was a working young man, okay? Because it says here that being 17 years old was feeding the flock with his brethren. So he was out there. So whatever this coat of many colors was, it did stand out. Now whether it was because of some status or for something great Joseph had done, it doesn't tell us. But I just thought I'd throw that in there. Maybe it was a reward for recognizing great achievement. And you have to watch that too, in families a lot of times. If one child excels in math, and another child struggles in math, you got to make sure that the one that is doing good gets accoladed, but the other one needs to be taught that it's okay, that we're here to help. And maybe that child that struggles in math excels in English. So, it's a balancing act to be a parent a lot of times, isn't it? And so, anyway, we have that thought in there. Jeremy, you have anything on that? Okay, okay. Jeff, you got anything on that? Okay. Anyway, he made him that coat. Verse 4 is where the trouble's going to start. And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him and could not speak peaceably unto him. We find Jacob had a role in setting that up, and Joseph in some kind of way maybe was his own worst enemy when he told on his brothers, and you can debate whether or not he should have done that. It was probably the right thing to do depending on what they were in, but we don't know the whole background and whole story of what was going on there with that. But we do know that they caught on, and that it seemed like Jacob loved Joseph more than all the rest of us. That can be problematic. Very problematic. Sometimes when siblings get things like that in their hearts and minds, that's something very hard to change. Because what happens is now, as a parent, sometimes you get put under a microscope, don't you? Yeah. And so that can be very difficult to change. Like I say, it's a balancing act, and none of it's perfect, okay? But it can be demonstrated to show that all are loved, even though they have diverse personalities. And that's what you get into a lot of times with parenting is no two children are alike. Everybody's got their diversity. Everybody's got their own personality. And one of the things that you have to learn is how to deal with diverse personalities. And I'll take that a step further. It can even be more challenging in the workplace. You've got all these personalities. You're trying to get everybody to pull on the same cart or the same wagon. And sometimes it can be pretty rough, okay? Matter of fact, it can get to the point to where you say, if these adults were my children, I'd take them out behind the woodshed with a switch. And I know this is being taped and going live, but the Bible does teach that children need correction, don't they? And we're not going to stay away from that subject. But that's how you feel sometimes, that I can put the correction mode in place. And so we find that they hated him and they could not speak peaceably unto him. We find that Jesus was loved by the Father, wasn't he? And it's because of the love that he had for the Father and the Father that had love for him. The Sadducees, they couldn't speak peaceably unto Jesus, could they? They hated that whole deal, didn't they? And we're beginning to see maybe a parallel here of what's going on, even though some of the events that's leading up to this are human events in general, brought on by human ways. But really what's going to put the icing on the cake is when the spiritual ways get involved in it, and God's going to get involved in it and say, hey, this is the role Joseph's going to play. And really, if they had stopped and looked at it for just a minute, this is going to be for our good. Hey, this is going to become a great family, and Joseph is going to be able to lead us out of this great family. But they didn't stop and think about it that way, because the first thing they thought about was Joseph's trying to make himself a king over us. We're going to bow down. Even Jacob was like, whoa, son, hang on just a minute. When we get to that part. So, anyway, we're not going to get into where Joseph dreamed a dream, and Joseph told his brethren, and notice this, they hated him yet the more. So all this did was increase the animosity that was present there in that family. And he said unto them, here I pray you this dream which I have dreamed. So here we go. He's going to tell them that dream. Y'all need to listen to me. Here's the dream that I have dreamed, and here's what it is. More prophecy, Jeremy. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheep arose, and also stood upright. And behold, your sheep stood round about, and made obedience to my sheep. Here we go. Wait a minute.
What he's saying, his sheep stood straight up. Mm-hmm. But them sheep, they kind of
bowed over to one obedience, didn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, they caught that picture, didn't they?
One thing it tells us a little later when you get to it in verse 11, said the brethren envied him for all that, but his father observed it.
Yeah.
Now Jacob had done some dreaming himself
Yeah.
in the past, you
Yeah.
know, in past 28 chapter,
Yeah.
I believe we studied about him seeing a ladder reaching from heaven to earth and saw angels treading back forward, going down on that ladder.
Oh, yeah.
So that made Jacob thought to himself, I better think on this a little.
Right, right. Even though he's going to kind of call in question Joseph before that, but yeah, he's going to realize there's something more going on here than just that because of what you said, because of the dreams that he had had. Yeah. And your sheep stood round about and made obedience to my sheep. And his brethren said to him, shalt thou indeed reign over us? Or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet more for his dreams and for his words. So it's increasing, isn't it? Especially when he made this bit of prophecy. And this has to do to deal with what's going to happen, when they get into Egypt, when the famine comes and the children of Jacob and them have to leave and go into Egypt for food. You either go there or starve. You got a choice. And so we find that his brethren didn't like that. And, you can tell by the way Moses structured the sons here. It's almost like they're kind of sarcastic about it. It's almost like, what? You're not going to reign over us. It's that type of setting, involvement. And the Bible just says, and they hated him even more. For that. Then he dreamed yet another dream. And told it his brethren and said, behold, I have dreamed a dream more. He said, I still got these dreams coming, guys. This ain't all that I got for you. And he said, behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. Wow. And he's using, the heavenly bodies to denote the children of Israel, the 12 sons and Jacob and all like that, the sun and the moon, the great bodies that were present there, and also the sub-bodies, which are the stars, hey, they bowed down to me. That doesn't go over good either, does it, Brother Con? And so we find that as he said this, notice what Jacob does to start with. Hopefully we'll get to what Brother Con said. It's kind of like, wait a minute, son, hold on. Notice what it says here. And he told it to his father and to his brethren, and his father rebuked him. Now wait a minute, Joseph. What's this dream you're dreaming about us going to bow down to me? All of us going to bow down to you. Don't you know you're right on the line and as far as inheritance goes and all this kind of stuff? And, I'm the head of the household. I'm the chief patriarch. So what is this business about you bowing down to me? So he gave him a rebuke. What is this dream you have dreamed? Shall I and thy mother and thy brethren indeed come to bow down ourselves to the earth? And so, he drags, Rachel back into this because that was the wife that he loved, and you can kind of fill in the sun and the stars and all this kind of stuff. But anyway, the whole point is, wait a minute. Are those that brought you into this world and those are the patriarchs of this household going to bow down to you? As an adult, with a 17-year-old coming to you and saying that he dreamed a dream and that one of these days you're going to bow down to me, it sounds almost rebellious in nature, doesn't it? But it's not. And I think Jacob's going to realize that once he thinks about this, and it's what Brother Con said. And we'll get to this in verse 11. And his brethren, there's that word envy. His brethren envied him, but his father observed the same. So, deep down, Jacob was probably like, there may be something more going here than what everybody realizes. He said, at one time, I was a young man, and there were events in my life where I had dreamed dreams that came true, that God had spoke to me. Brother Kahn brought about, Jacob's ladder. What about him wrestling with the angel and all those types of things that went on in his life? And so we find that, Jacob may be thinking in his heart, in the back of his mind, this may be something special here that's going to happen. This could be God working again. Sure could be. And we know it's going to be. And what we find, what happens here is the brethren, his brothers envied him, but his father observed the saying. When you look over there in Matthew chapter 27, envy has to do with the resentment of someone else and maybe the good fortune they're having or something like that. Envy breeds malice and hatred and all those other things. And it says here in Matthew chapter 27 and verse 17, therefore when they were gathered together, Pilate said unto them, whom will ye that I release unto you, Barabbas or Jesus, which is called the Christ? For he knew. He knew. Pilate knew what was going on. He knew how these people was. He'd been dealing with them off and on and for so long. Really when you go back and look at it from a historical standpoint of view and what some of the writings have been said about it, Pilate hated fooling with these folks. He really didn't have nothing to do with it. They were a thorn in his side, okay? And that's why it says that he knew what they were doing. He knew how crooked they were. He knew how corrupt they were. He knew how backstabbing, if you will, they could be. For he knew that for envy they had delivered him. That's what happened because of envy. And this is what even though the things that Joseph is saying is true, a lot of times people can't accept the truth, can they? They can't accept what will be. The thing is, they're looking at all this in a physical sense, aren't they? When Joseph is saying, you're going to bow down before me and all this, they're looking at, well, he's done set himself up to be some kind of great king over us and over our inheritance and all this kind of stuff. And he thinks we're going to bow down to him and we're going to be his servants and all this kind of thing. And all this, Jeremy, is because his father loves him more than us, and he made him a coat of many colors. And that's kind of the earthly thought, isn't it? But what's God's thought on the plan? God's thought on the plan is there's going to need to be preservation for these people. My will is still going to be done in spite of what they do. And this will is going to be carried out. So he's beginning to temper Joseph because God knows in his infinite wisdom what's going to happen to Joseph, and Joseph's going to be sold and go up into Egypt. Now, that'll temper you, won't it? For what's to come. God was using this as a tempering process. Just like he would temper metal when you heat it, you cool it, maybe you heat it again, you dip it in oil, then you put it in a furnace that is half of what the tempering rate, the heating rate is, and what that heat does then, it tempers it. You bring it into strength. In its natural state, it's very malleable. Even steel, until it's tempered, can be dealt with. But once you've tempered in that hardened state, now it becomes more difficult to deal with. And so this is what God was doing. He was using these events to begin a temperament, to temper Joseph for the work that was hid. And I'm going to stop right there and ring the buzzer, and we'll pick up right there. But we know that once the events start unfolding, Joseph's life is going to change drastically. It's going to change drastically. And then we'll stop right there and we'll pick up next week.
6 years to go through that one book,
To win.
that one book.
We could keep adding, just keep adding to it. Huh?
Just keep adding
Yeah,
every other verse. It's just-
yeah, so we've already added to 14, I think I'm up to 17, 18. And we only, what, 11, 12 verse.
One in each verse.
Yeah, just about, yeah, a lot of prophecy in there, sure is.